Thank you very much, Chair. Ms Jackson, I might start with you. What's the average percentage first semester decline in overall revenue for your members?
So look, I'm afraid, Senator Paterson, we just haven't done the figures that way. We've done them for calendar years because that's how universities operate. So as I said before, our estimates, which have been updated recently to take account of the ever-shifting sands, are between 3.1 billion and 4.8 billion this year and 16 billion over the forward estimates, over the 4 years. I'd be very happy to send you both the modelling but also the assumptions underpinning that modelling if that would be helpful.
So is it possible to break it down into a semester basis?
Look, that would be very ad hoc. It's just not the basis on which we did the calculations. And I suppose you could do it that way, but that's not the way we did do it.
Okay. Could you at least do it on a yearly basis in percentage terms rather than raw dollars?
As in percentage of overall
percentage
revenue?
Decline. What is the percentage decline in revenue?
Look, we certainly could, and the percentage decline is just being slipped under my nose as we speak. So the percentage decline for compared to a base case, and again I can table this for you as well because numbers are always hard on the audio, but the estimated revenue losses as a share of total operating revenue for this year, 2020, between 8.7% to 13%. For 2021, they're 15.8%. For 2022, 11.2%. And for 2023, 7.3%.
Okay. So, sorry, in that the first number you gave me had a range, 8.7 to 13. Is that right? What's the range encompassing?
That's a good question, Senator. Let me look meaningfully at my colleagues.
Estimated range of dollars.
So we've estimated a range of dollars, 3.1 billion to 4.8. So that's why there's a percentage range.
Right.
We wanted to do these numbers very, very carefully. They're based on very conservative assumptions.
Great. And so this is obviously an average of all of your members. So within your members, there would be a degree of variance. But I've heard you say a couple of times that a lot of universities would have qualified for JobKeeper under different rules. But on the figures that you've given me, it's not even close to the 30% decline required to qualify for businesses, let alone the 50% decline to qualify if you're a business of more than $1 billion.
So Senator, I'm sure you're aware there is the revenue declines are mostly at the foot of international student enrolments, and the percentages of international students varies quite substantially across the sector. That's why you get a variation in who would qualify and who wouldn't.
So do you have a list of universities that you believe would have qualified?
No, I don't.
No. So where do you get the evidence from to claim that they would have qualified if you don't have a list?
We take their word for it, Senator.
So some universities
I trust my members. Yes.
Right. So which ones?
Look, I don't have a list in front of me right now.
Could you take that on notice?
Look, I could possibly take that on notice, but some of those conversations will have been in confidence on assessments. But you could look at publicly available information and see that the universities would have qualified.
Yeah, I'll be interested to know which of those members you refer to have had a 30% decline or more of revenue within the first semester, or if you can't do that, within the first year. Professor Gardner, do you have any better data on the group of 8 universities, or are you in the same position as Universities Australia?
Sorry, Senator Paterson, I don't have the total data I don't have individual data for the group of 8. I do know that in the conversations and in fact on the criteria they were originally published, a number of us qualified and we had accounting advice independent to that end. So yes, a number of us would have qualified. The group of 8 typically has significant proportion of international students and international student revenue.
Just to clarify, you're saying you would have qualified on the month-to-month measurement of decline of revenue, not on a semester basis?
On the month-to-month, yes.
Yeah, because obviously universities' income can be quite lumpy. For example, if student fees are all due in 1 month, that wouldn't necessarily give a accurate picture of the university's overall financial health for a whole semester or a whole year, would it?
Senator Paterson, I think you could make the same. Judgment about the revenue of many, many businesses. Certainly, students pay in different ways, and so we get revenues in, over different profiles. But that's true, I would have to say to you, of many businesses, those who work on large export contracts and the like as well.
Okay. Universities have received a number of warnings over recent years that they are dangerously overexposed to the international student market and the Chinese student market in particular. One report published last year by Professor Salvatore Babones from the Centre for Independent Studies identified 7 universities in particular, most of which are Group of 8 universities, and said that there was great financial risks. What steps did universities take to hedge against that risk?
Every university.
I'm happy to go, Margaret. No, go ahead, Margaret. Sorry.
Every university that I'm aware of runs a relatively sophisticated risk assessment. Universities run, and all of them that I'm aware of, where I'm closely aware of the internal operational details, were running significant diversification strategies. I can say that Australian universities, like the whole Australian economy, and like almost all that I'm aware of its major exporting industries, were heavily dependent on China as their major source of export income. And in fact, universities were not more exposed than many other forms of major exporters. Diversification was underway. People were attempting to make sure that they had a balance of students, a balance of revenues. People have been growing revenues across a range of sources, diversifying students by cohort, by nation, revenue by source. But it is also true, Senator, that it is very unusual to be criticised for actually creating one of Australia's most successful service exports. And I would have thought that that was something that we should celebrate, and that we should understand that that global service export is one of the very high value exports that we provide, transformed into the world around us. And it is one that builds relationships with the world around us and builds for us what people like to call soft diplomacy, a set of relationships that are very important for the future of our nation.
Yeah, certainly I don't think anyone's saying there shouldn't be any international students, but just whether all universities were prudent in managing the risk of overexposure. I note for the record that Monash University, your institution, is not one of the ones that was identified as high risk in this report, but many other members of the Group of 8 were. Ms Jackson, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Look, just very briefly, I'd agree with everything Professor Gardner's just said. China is a very large country, 1.3 billion people. 70% of Chinese people will be middle class by 2030. Everywhere Chinese students choose to study, they are represented in numbers. One of the reasons we are attractive to many students, but specifically to Chinese students, is we're in the same time zone and we are a safe place to study in. Would you have us close our doors to Chinese students? Some of the great discoveries in Australia, including the cervical cancer vaccine, in concert with Ian Fraser, have been made by Chinese researchers, some of those who came here as students in the first place. 144 countries is where students come from. We have 144 source countries. There are just going to be a substantial number of Chinese students any place they choose to study, because it's a big country with lots of ambitious, talented students.
Okay, I just have one final area of questions, Chair, but I just want to put a question on notice to both organisations, whether you made any comment or provided any analysis on the Professor Babones report in August last year when it was released. I haven't been able to find any online, that's why I'm just curious if you had any comment on it. But moving on to another matter, I believe the University of Queensland is a member of both of your institutions. Jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. Are you familiar with evidence that the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Peter Hoy, gave to a Queensland parliamentary inquiry this week?
Is this about COVID-19, Senator Paterson?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a COVID-19 committee in Queensland.
Okay. Anyway.
So, Senator, I've read media reports about Professor Hoy's appearance and Professor Margaret Shield also, I think, at a Queensland inquiry similar to this, but on a state level?
Yes. So I'll just for completeness, so everyone's up to date with the same information. Professor Hoy said there comes a time where, in say 20 years' time, if we hadn't had an opportunity to invest in capital, future students will be educated in almost Dickensian conditions. We have to grapple with that, and we know what the choices are. I wonder if you share Professor Hoy's opinion that Dickensian conditions are in prospect at universities in Australia.
Perhaps I can make a comment, Senator Paterson,
Please.
about capital infrastructure. And just to give you some context. So there has been very little funding in most recent years for capital infrastructure in universities, and it is funded, if you like, out of the way they manage their overall operating funds. Since the Education Investment Fund ceased some years ago. Currently, under the Job Ready graduates, there's no provision in that funding for capital also. So the funding for capital comes from what you can generate as a surplus on your operating funds, and that is again at risk when there's a downturn in revenue. I can say that much of the improvement in recent years in infrastructure of which I'm aware in universities has been funded by a combination of their ability to run surpluses on their operating funds for capital. That's in fact what you in large part run your surplus for, to the maintenance of your asset base and the development of new capital investment and borrowings.
Yeah,
and
thank you for that.
It's true that there would be a serious degradation in infrastructure unless there is another source.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. To Dickensian conditions, though, I mean, are we worried about no more running water, gruel being served in university canteens instead of food, rats and mice running around, no more sewerage, child labour returning?
I think, Senator Paterson, we understand that Dickensian is a metaphor for a degradation in the quality of infrastructure, which is important to high quality.
It's a fairly hyperbolic
Thank you, Professor Gardner.
though, isn't it?
Senator Paterson,
Sorry,
we only have about 20 minutes left and a number of senators.
Thank you. I should just flag that given Professor Hoy's unique perspective, perhaps the committee should call him and we can hear from him about which Dickensian conditions he thinks to be on his campus.
I look forward to the head-to-head that you would have there.